The sun blazes down on the marching Roman legion. Each step lands with force, steady and deliberate. The sound of armor and boots echoes like thunder, while the polished metal shines so brightly it almost blinds the eye. Every soldier carries a weapon sharpened for one purpose: battle. This is not a parade through Rome's proud streets. This march leads to another fight, another test, and another victory to claim. Behind every legionnaire stands the might and pride of the Roman Empire. Yet hidden behind that power is a harsher truth, the unforgiving reality of war. In battle, survival was never guaranteed. Courage mattered, but so did the weapon in your grip, the tool that could mean life or death. Today, we often imagine Roman soldiers as noble warriors, disciplined, fearless, armored champions wielding the gladius and the scutum. We see these images in films and textbooks. But what if we looked closer? What if we examined the very heart of their arsenal, the tools that changed ordinary men into relentless fighters? These weapons were not just iron and wood. They were extensions of the soldier himself, created to deliver swift and merciless destruction. Rome's strength did not rest only on its discipline or tactics. It also came from the brutal design of its arms. So the question remains, which weapons were the most devastating? Which tools ground Rome's enemies into dust, leaving behind only fear, blood, and ruin? Stay with us, because today we uncovered 10 of the most brutal weapons ever used by Roman legionnaires, and why they were so deadly in the hands of Rome's soldiers. This journey takes us deep into the past and straight into the core of Rome's war machine. Gladius. When people think of Roman weapons, the gladius is usually the first that comes to mind. This short, double-edged sword measured about 60-70 centimeters in length. To the Romans, it was far more than just a blade. It represented their entire approach to warfare. The gladius was built for close combat, where legionnaires stood shoulder to shoulder in tight formations. In those conditions, long swords were awkward and impractical. But the gladius, with its compact size, allowed soldiers to thrust with deadly accuracy, striking through both armor and flesh. Its power came from its simplicity, short, fast, and lethal. Designed for piercing rather than slashing, it was especially dangerous when used in large, crowded battles. Crafting the gladius was a careful process. The blade was usually made from high-quality steel and forged with great skill to ensure both strength and sharpness. Roman blacksmiths applied advanced methods for their era, such as tempering, which gave the blade the hardness needed for combat, while also keeping it flexible enough not to snap during heavy fighting. The handle was often carved from wood or bone, and shaped to fit securely in the hand, even during intense battles. Some handles were reinforced with metal parts for added strength and balance. The scabbards, typically made from wood and covered with leather, were often decorated with metal fittings. These not only protected the blade but also reflected the status of the soldier who carried it, sometimes richly adorned to show rank or prestige. For a Roman legionnaire, the gladius was not just a piece of equipment. It became part of his identity, an extension of his hand and his duty to fight for Rome. Historians believe the gladius was inspired by swords used by the Celts and Iberians, but the Romans refined it, shortening the design and adapting it perfectly to their own battlefield tactics. This improvement turned the gladius into one of the most iconic and effective weapons in ancient history. The gladius soon became the true symbol of the Roman legion and of Rome's military strength. Its small size made it easy to carry on a soldier's belt without restricting movement, and it could be drawn quickly whenever needed. When paired with the heavy shield known as the scutum, a weapon in its own right that served both as defense and as a battering ram, the gladius formed a deadly combination that gave Roman soldiers unmatched control in close combat. Every strike of the gladius spilled enemy blood. Every decisive blow helped push Rome's borders farther across the ancient world. This sword was never just a weapon. It was a tool of conquest, one of the key reasons the empire rose to power on the battlefield. Over time, several versions of the gladius were developed. The earliest and largest was the gladius hispaniensis, with a slightly curved blade that allowed both piercing and cutting attacks. Later models became lighter and more standardized, including the gladius mainz, which featured a straighter blade with a sharper point, and the Gladius Pompeii, the most common design, compact and practical, named after finds discovered in Pompeii. These variations reflected the Roman army's evolving tactics and needs. Yet the core idea never changed. A short, efficient sword, designed for brutal efficiency in packed formations. But the gladius was only one part of the legionnaires' deadly arsenal. Before hand-to-hand fighting even began, Rome relied on another weapon to weaken and break enemy lines: the pilum. This heavy throwing spear was carefully engineered to wound and disable enemies before the clash of shields and swords. The pilum often measured up to 2 men in length, but its real strength was in its design. The long, narrow iron shank was made from softer iron and attached to the wooden shaft with pins or rivets. This meant that when the spear struck a shield, the tip would bend, making it difficult to remove and rendering the enemy's shield useless. The pilum wasn't just a projectile, it was Rome's opening strike, softening resistance and breaking formations before the decisive push with sword and shield began. When the pilum struck its target, the soft iron shank bent on impact, making it impossible for enemies to reuse. This was not a flaw, but a deliberate tactical design. If the pilum pierced an enemy's shield, the bent rod became lodged inside, making the shield heavy, awkward, and practically useless. The defender then faced a choice: drop the shield and lose vital protection, or keep carrying it with the bent spear dragging them down, slowing movements and breaking their formation. Now imagine thousands of pila raining down at once before the legions advanced. Enemy lines were thrown into chaos, soldiers struggling to pull the spears free, shields becoming dead weight, formations breaking apart. In that moment of confusion, Roman legionnaires closed in, unleashing a storm of gladius thrusts, cutting down an enemy already weakened and disorganized. The pilum was not only a weapon of death, but also of fear and disruption. Each throw carried the promise of bloodshed, stripping away enemy confidence before the clash even began. Roman soldiers were trained to use them with precision and power, often carrying 2 pila each, a lighter one for long-range throws and a heavier one for short-range strikes. The weapon proved its worth across countless campaigns, from Gaul to Britain, from Dacia to the Middle East. Its simple but effective design demonstrated the Roman gift for practical, deadly innovation, capable of shifting the outcome of battles with a single devastating volley. One famous example came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, when Octavian's marines used pila to strike down the crews of Antony and Cleopatra's ships, a decisive move that helped secure victory. The pilum was so effective that its design remained largely unchanged for centuries, staying in use until the final days of the Western Roman Empire. But what gave Roman soldiers the ability to withstand enemy attacks while striking back with such force? Alongside the sword and the spear, one image always comes to mind: the large, rectangular, curved shield, known as the scutum. The scutum was far more than just a wooden shield for protection. It was a core part of Rome's combat system and a weapon in its own right. Built from several layers of wood glued together, then covered with leather and reinforced along the edges with metal, the scutum weighed around 7 to 10 kilos. At its center was a rounded metal boss called the umbo, designed to deflect enemy strikes but also to deliver crushing blows of its own. In battle, the scutum was used not only to block swords, spears, and arrows, but also to strike back. Legionnaires could slam it into opponents, knock them down, break bones, or force them off balance. A strike with the metal boss aimed at the chest or face could cause serious injury, while the edges of the shield were sharp enough to cut skin and muscle. In formation, the scutum became even more powerful. The most famous example was the testudo, or tortoise formation, where shields locked together into a nearly impenetrable wall. Soldiers at the front and sides held theirs outward, while those in the middle raised them overhead, protecting the unit from arrows and projectiles. This tactic was especially effective in sieges or when advancing across open ground under heavy fire. Training with the scutum was essential for every Roman soldier. Legionnaires learned not only how to defend themselves and maintain formation, but also how to use the shield offensively, like a battering ram. This allowed them to create openings in enemy lines, giving space for the gladius to deliver its lethal thrusts. The scutum symbolized the unity and discipline of Rome's legions. It was their fortress, their protection, and their weapon all at once. Together, a wall of scuta created a shield barrier of wood and iron that could absorb enemy charges and then push forward with unstoppable force. Over time, the design of the scutum changed. Early versions in the Republic were more oval-shaped, while the imperial period introduced the large rectangular style we recognize today. These adjustments reflected Rome's constant drive to refine and perfect their tools of war. But what happened when the enemy was fortified behind walls, or when destruction was needed at a distance, beyond the reach of swords and spears? That is where the Romans turned to even heavier weapons. Ballista. When the Romans needed to break through strong fortifications or strike enemy forces from a distance, they turned to the power of military engineering. Among their most impressive creations was the ballista, a massive siege weapon that worked much like a giant crossbow. The ballista was capable of launching enormous bolts or heavy stones across long distances with devastating force. Its power came from twisted ropes, usually made from animal sinew, which stored huge amounts of energy and released it in a single explosive shot. The results were terrifying. Bolts could tear through thick wooden defenses, punch through armor, and even pass through multiple bodies at once. Some bolts were designed with barbs or notches, making them almost impossible to remove without causing further injury. Others were tipped for maximum damage, increasing the chance of infection and death. Stone projectiles, sometimes weighing dozens of kilograms, could smash down entire sections of walls, bring towers crashing to the ground, and throw enemy defenses into chaos. Although the ballista was built for sieges, it also saw use on open battlefields. It could tear through tightly packed formations, cutting down enemy soldiers before Roman infantry even closed in. Its presence alone struck fear, often breaking morale before the fighting began. Building and operating a ballista required skill. These machines were handled by trained engineers and gunners, who carefully calculated angles and distances to ensure deadly accuracy. Ballistae came in different sizes. Smaller versions could be moved directly onto the battlefield to target enemy leaders or detachments, while the larger siege models were assembled on site from prepared parts. No matter the size, their effect was the same. They allowed Rome to dictate the terms of war. City walls, towers, and enemy ranks could all be reduced to rubble and corpses under their relentless fire. The sound of a ballista being wound and released was enough to make even hardened defenders tremble, knowing destruction was moments away. But when even greater power was needed, when the target was not wooden towers or enemy soldiers but thick stone walls and fortified gates, the Romans turned to another fearsome invention, the battering ram, known as the Ares. Battering ram, Ares. One of the most destructive weapons in the Roman siege arsenal was the battering ram, often reinforced at the front with a metal tip shaped like a ram's head, hence the name Ares. This massive weapon was usually built from a huge wooden log, sometimes strengthened with iron along its full length, which gave it extraordinary durability. The ram could be swung directly by dozens or even hundreds of soldiers, or mounted on a special frame with a suspension system that allowed it to deliver repeated, crushing blows against enemy walls or gates. Its purpose was brutally simple: to smash a gap wide enough for Roman legionnaires to storm through and finish the assault. The battering ram was not only a physical weapon, but also a psychological one. Each thunderous strike shook the ground, echoing through the walls and into the hearts of the defenders. The deafening rhythm of wood-pounding stone carried a single message: resistance would not last forever. Every crack in the masonry brought defenders closer to collapse, and they knew that once the walls gave way, the Romans rarely showed mercy. The fall of a gate or wall often meant the sacking of a city and the slaughter of its defenders. Using the battering ram, however, was extremely dangerous. The soldiers operating it were exposed to a storm of arrows, stones, boiling water, and burning pitch poured from above. To protect them, the ram was often placed under a movable shelter known as a tortoise or vinea, reinforced with wood, hides, or soaked animal skins to resist fire. In some cases, it was installed inside a mobile siege tower, which allowed it to be pushed right up against the enemy walls with added protection. Despite the risks, the battering ram was indispensable. It allowed the Romans to shatter even the strongest fortifications, breaking the will of their enemies and opening the way for conquest. It became a symbol of Roman determination and ruthless efficiency, proof that they would stop at nothing to achieve victory, even at the cost of many lives. But there were times when sheer force was not enough. When the Romans needed both power and precision, launching heavy stones over walls or striking targets at long range, they turned to another deadly invention, the onager. Onager. Unlike the ballista, which fired its projectiles in a straight line, the onager was built for high, mounted fire. This made it especially effective in sieges, as it could hurl stones over city walls or strike enemy troops hidden behind fortifications where direct shots couldn't reach. The sheer power of the onager was staggering. It could launch rocks weighing 50 to 60 kilos across hundreds of meters, sending them crashing down like deadly missiles from the sky. Each strike caused massive destruction and spread fear among anyone unlucky enough to be in its path. The mechanism of the onager was simple but devastating. A solid wooden frame supported a torsion system made from tightly twisted animal tendons, often from oxen or horses. Attached to this was a long lever fitted with a sling at its end. Soldiers would pull the lever down, twisting the tendons and storing enormous energy. When released, the lever whipped forward with violent force, launching a stone in a high arc. Every shot shook the battlefield. The ground trembled, the machine roared, and the crashing stones tore through buildings, shattered siege towers, and smashed enemy troops hiding behind cover. Sometimes, instead of stones, the Romans used incendiary projectiles, pots filled with burning pitch or even early forms of Greek fire. These set wooden defenses ablaze, spreading chaos and panic among defenders. During city sieges, onagers were relentless. Their continuous bombardment could weaken walls, crush morale, and leave defenders exhausted, unable to find rest day or night. On the battlefield, they were equally devastating, scattering formations, destroying enemy war machines, and forcing opponents into retreat. The onager was the embodiment of brute force. It rained destruction from above, a reminder of the Roman military's ruthless efficiency and ability to adapt engineering to warfare. Depending on size, each onager required a skilled crew of several men who carefully controlled the torsion strength and tension to ensure maximum range and accuracy. But Rome's arsenal was not only about massive siege engines. When the legions needed a more versatile tool, something useful in both construction and combat, always carried by every soldier, they turned to a far simpler weapon. Not all Roman arms were designed for large-scale destruction. Some were practical, everyday tools that could still become lethal when the situation demanded it. Some Roman tools were just as deadly as weapons, even though their primary purpose was engineering. One of the most important was the delabra, a heavy and durable tool that worked as both a shovel and a pickaxe. Every legionary carried one. The delabra wasn't designed as a battlefield weapon, but its importance to the Roman war machine was enormous. With it, soldiers built roads, camps, bridges, and siege works. Legionaries weren't only fighters, they were also engineers. They could dig trenches, raise fortifications, and prepare defenses at incredible speed, giving Rome a massive tactical advantage. Its strong design, often with a sharp metal tip, allowed it to cut through earth, stone, and wood with ease. Thanks to this, the legions could set up fortified camps at the end of a long march or carve roads through rugged terrain, keeping their campaigns moving forward. The delabra symbolized this engineering strength. Its versatility made each soldier self-sufficient, reducing reliance on supply wagons filled with specialized tools. In effect, every legionary became a mobile engineer, ready to adapt to any situation on the march or in battle. The delabra, along with the pickaxe, was a standard part of a soldier's kit. It reinforced the idea that Roman legionaries were more than ordinary infantry. They were builders, laborers, and fighters rolled into one. This tool formed the backbone of Roman logistics and battlefield flexibility, allowing armies to fortify positions even deep in enemy territory. But when the situation demanded it, The Dolabra could transform into a weapon. If a soldier lost his sword or was caught off guard, the sharp edge of the shovel could slice into flesh while the heavy pick could smash bones or skulls. Against lightly armored enemies, such as barbarian tribes, this improvised weapon was brutally effective. The Dolabra showed that in Rome, even a simple tool could be turned into an instrument of war, proof of the adaptability and resourcefulness that helped make the legions unstoppable. In the hands of a skilled fighter, the Dolabra could inflict terrible injuries, especially in the chaos of close combat where every strike counted. Its long handle gave soldiers extra reach, while its heavy weight delivered crushing power. If a legionary was caught unarmed, he could swing the Dolabra like a mace or axe, proving his adaptability on the battlefield. The tool stood as a symbol of Roman practicality, equally effective for building fortifications or breaking enemies. It was a hidden weapon, always within reach, showing how the Romans could turn even ordinary equipment into instruments of war. Their genius was in extracting the maximum use from everything they carried, ensuring nothing went to waste. But not all Roman weapons relied on direct strikes. Some were designed to spread fear and confusion before a blade was even drawn. Among these were chains and hooks, tools that may have looked simple, but were brutally effective in both naval battles and sieges. At sea, the Romans used grappling hooks and heavy chains to seize enemy ships. By pulling vessels closer, they neutralized enemy tactics like ramming or maneuvering, forcing the fight into hand-to-hand combat, where the Roman gladius reigned supreme. One of the most famous examples was the Corvus, a boarding bridge fitted with a deadly spike that locked into an enemy's deck, allowing legionaries to storm across and turn a naval clash into a land battle. Chains also tied ships together, creating chaos in enemy fleets and leaving them vulnerable. Hooks sharpened to a point could even double as weapons in desperate close encounters, cutting into enemy flesh during boarding fights. They were not designed for killing outright, but for control, disabling the enemy, breaking formations, and handing Rome the advantage. These tactics were decisive in Rome's rise as a naval power. Although they had little seafaring tradition at first, their innovation with chains, hooks, and the Corvus helped them outmaneuver seasoned rivals like the Carthaginians. It proved that Roman pragmatism and engineering could turn weakness into dominance. Chains and hooks also found use during sieges on land, once again proving their versatility and destructive impact. Whether at sea or on the battlefield, these simple yet brutal tools reinforced Rome's reputation for relentless ingenuity in warfare. Hooks, often built massive and reinforced, were among the Romans' most destructive tools during sieges. These heavy iron hooks, attached to strong cables, could be hurled over battlements or fastened to gates. With the force of winches or hundreds of soldiers pulling in unison, entire sections of walls, towers, or wooden palisades could be ripped away from their foundations. The result was devastating, sudden breaches that allowed Roman troops to surge inside, spreading fear and shattering the defenders' morale. Chains had their role as well. They were used to disable enemy siege engines, such as towers or catapults, by binding their mechanisms or dragging them down. What seemed like simple tools of capture turned into instruments of destruction, slowly breaking resistance and clearing the way for victory. These devices may have looked basic, but in the skilled hands of Roman engineers and legionaries, they became powerful weapons of conquest. For Rome, no method was too small or too brutal if it brought them closer to triumph. Yet not all Roman weapons were massive or obvious. Some were small, discreet, and relied on cunning rather than size. One of these silent threats was the caltrop, also known as the tribulus, a small but deadly spiked device. Made of 4 sharp points arranged so that one always faced upward, caltrops could be scattered across roads or fields, ready to cripple men and animals alike. They were often spread in the paths of advancing troops where they pierced through sandals or injured horses, instantly slowing momentum and spreading panic. Cavalry charges could collapse before they began, and infantry formations broke apart as soldiers tripped, fell, or screamed in pain. Picture an enemy army marching confidently toward Roman lines. Suddenly, soldiers stumble, horses rear, and cries of agony echo across the battlefield. The advance halts, chaos spreads, and the once disciplined enemy force becomes an easy target. Caltrops were simple, compact, and easy to deploy, but their psychological and physical impact was immense. They were the perfect example of Rome's tactical genius, using even the smallest tools to create outsized advantages in war. Horses would rear in agony as their legs were pierced, often breaking under the pain, sending their riders crashing helplessly to the ground. Once unseated, these cavalrymen became easy prey for Roman archers and spearmen waiting nearby. Caltrops themselves rarely killed outright, but that was never their true purpose. Their power lay in making the enemy vulnerable, scattering formations, lowering morale, and setting the stage for a devastating Roman counterattack. A confused, injured army was no match for the disciplined legions that could then advance and finish the job with ease. These cruel spikes were usually scattered in front of Roman defensive lines, hidden in narrow passes, near city gates, or along escape routes where retreating soldiers would stumble right into them. They were simple to make, easy to carry in pouches, and brutally effective at almost no cost, an efficient weapon of mass disruption. The wounds caused by caltrops were particularly vicious. They were deep, dirty, and in the medical conditions of the ancient world, often led to deadly infections like sepsis or gangrene. Even when not fatal, the injuries left soldiers crippled and unable to fight, forcing the enemy to divert resources and attention to care for the wounded. Their effectiveness was greatest in defense, where the Romans could prepare the battlefield in advance, scattering caltrops in grass, hiding them under sand, or burying them beneath leaves. Invisible until the last moment, they turned every step into a gamble with pain and death. Caltrops perfectly symbolized Roman cunning and their refusal to shy away from harsh or dishonorable tactics. In Roman military doctrine, victory mattered above all else, and the humiliation and suffering of the enemy was part of crushing their will. These tiny, unseen killers were a constant reminder of the ruthlessness that defined Rome's approach to war. But not all Roman tools of brutality were used on the battlefield. When it came to suppressing revolts, punishing slaves, or enforcing discipline within their own ranks, the Romans relied on something far more personal: the flagrum. Unlike the sword or spear, the flagrum was not a weapon of war, but a whip of punishment and control. It was made with several leather straps, often embedded with metal balls, sharp bones, or even hooks designed to tear into flesh with each lash. Every strike ripped skin apart, leaving deep wounds, blood, and unbearable pain. The flagrum was infamous in Roman society, used for torture, public punishment, and even executions. It was one of the most feared instruments of cruelty, designed not just to hurt but to break the spirit of those who defied authority. Even within the disciplined Roman legions, commanders and centurions used similar whips to enforce order, ensuring that no soldier dared to challenge the strict discipline that kept Rome's armies united and unstoppable. It was not only a tool of pain but a grim reminder that Rome demanded obedience at all costs. In the hands of a slave driver, a mine overseer, or a military tribune, the flagrum was an instrument of raw power and fear. Every strike tore deep into the skin, leaving wounds that could easily become infected. Without proper treatment, rare in the ancient world, these injuries often led to gangrene, sepsis, and in many cases, a slow and agonizing death. The purpose of the flagrum was never quick execution. Its design was meant to maximize pain, crush resistance, and force obedience. It was a weapon of intimidation, a constant reminder of who held authority. This brutal tool formed part of Rome's system of control, where fear and violence were everyday methods of keeping order. In such a society, punishment and cruelty often went hand in hand. The flagrum symbolized both punishment and domination. Its use was often public, staged deliberately to terrify onlookers. The sound alone, the sharp whistle of the whip, the heavy crack on flesh, followed by screams of agony, echoed through camps and city streets, serving as a chilling warning of the consequences of disobedience. For slaves and lower classes, life in Rome meant living under the constant threat of this weapon. The flagrum could break not only the body, but also the human spirit, turning individuals into submissive, fearful subjects. It was more than a whip. It was a daily reminder that Rome's stability depended not only on laws and legions, but on the whip-wielding enforcers who showed no mercy. The flagrum became one of the most brutal symbols of Roman power, an invisible but ever-present force that secured obedience through pain and fear. And with that, we've explored the terrifying arsenal of Roman soldiers, 10 brutal weapons that cemented Rome's reputation as a military giant. From the legendary gladius, which carved empires in close combat, to the sneaky caltrops that brought cavalry to their knees and the massive siege engines that could shatter stone walls, each tool served a purpose beyond killing. Even the flagrum, though not a battlefield weapon, reflected the same ruthless philosophy. Roman warfare and discipline were built on innovation, pragmatism, and merciless efficiency. Every weapon, whether simple or complex, was designed to achieve a tactical goal: breaking defenses, spreading fear, destroying morale, or enforcing absolute obedience. Rome's power wasn't just in its legions. It was in its ability to combine engineering, strategy, and sheer brutality to dominate enemies and control its empire. It was through this combination of careful planning and ruthless efficiency that the Roman legions managed to conquer much of the known world. What you've just seen is more than a list of weapons. It's a glimpse into how Rome used technology, discipline, and tactics to reach its goals. It also reminds us of the heavy price at which the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was won and preserved. If you enjoyed this story and want to dive deeper into the hidden, often overlooked secrets of military history and ancient civilizations, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We're excited to bring you more incredible and surprising facts from the past. Stories that will challenge the way you see history and open your eyes to details most people never hear about. Now we'd love to hear from you. What part of the Roman war machine or even other ancient civilizations would you like us to cover next? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your ideas matter to us, and we're always glad to turn them into new research and new videos for you.